Welcome, everybody, to According to Matthew.
So I'm not joined by Patrick Anderson, who unfortunately could not make it today, but
I am super excited to introduce our guest today, Cara Santa Maria, who's a science communicator and a science journalist. How are you doing today, Cara?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for coming on. I've been following your work for a while, and I was on your podcast a couple years ago, so it's cool to kind of have you come on here as the guest this time.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited.
Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to start kind of broad and hear more about your background for some listeners that maybe aren't sure about how people even get into science communication, since it's not necessarily like a structured field right now, or it's kind of growing, but there's not a lot of ways that people can kind of jump into it. So I was wondering if you could just kind of share some of your story about how you started off in science academically and then shifted more into science communication.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. I think it's getting to be more and more common that universities have, if not science communication programs, at least some courses or maybe even some sort of extracurricular lectures and things on it. But when I was in school, like SciComm, I'm sure it existed, but I hadn't heard of it. Mm-hmm. So I was a psychology undergrad back in Texas, where I grew up, and I did a philosophy minor, and then realized in doing an undergraduate thesis in psychology that I really liked neuropsychology. And I felt kind of like my education didn't quite give me the background that I needed. You know, I didn't really have a good grasp on cellular or systems neuroscience. Mm-hmm. So I decided to switch to the biology department and get a master's in neurobiology at my alma mater in Texas, which was the University of North Texas. I did a master's thesis there. And then I moved to New York to do a PhD in clinical neuropsychology at Queens College, which actually Queens College was the campus, but it's the City University of New York's graduate center, where basically all graduate students at CUNY go to the same grad center. None of them actually go there for classes. That's just where they're enrolled. So I did take a year off in between each of those degrees. I finished school quite young. I got my undergrad when I was 20, and I think I just needed a little bit of time. So I took a year off in between that, did my master's, took another year off, and then started in New York. And realized very quickly that it was not the right program for me, that New York was not the right city for me. I was pretty depressed. I had been in therapy my whole life, and I, carried a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, and I always knew that, but I was definitely one of those people who's like, I don't need meds. Meds are for people who can't handle this. And New York just brought it all out. It was dark, it was cold, it was dirty, it was difficult. People didn't smile, people didn't say hi. And so I pretty quickly realized after a year being there that it wasn't really the right time, right place. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Was dating somebody who lived in LA, would visit all the time. And I was like, the sun, it feels so good on my face. It makes me the happies. And so I said, screw it. I'm just going to move to LA. I'll probably find like a lab, jockey job there. Like I'll just be a lab assistant or something, because I had a lot of experience in laboratory science at that point, because I had managed my neuroscience lab when I was doing my master's degree. And I looked around a little, but I also met some random people. And for me, it was a total fluke, SciComm. I just talked about science all the time because I was crazy in love with it. And so I'd be at parties and be like, well, science is cool. And people would be like, I'm an actor. And I was like, that's boring. And so people, and the weird thing is out here in LA, people like ate it up. They were like, what? Tell me about black holes. Tell me about the brain. And so I did. And just through that, I was really lucky to have some doors open up. I got offered to kind of be an expert guest. So most of my SciComm work has been in front of the camera. And I know that's not very common. A lot of people get started in like more of a writing capacity. They might start as bloggers, which is a very common way to just get going. Or now that podcasting is so kind of democratized and easy, it's another great way to get started. I did not start podcasting. I podcast now, but it took me a while to figure out that that's something I should do. So I really started in front of the camera. I started as an expert guest. When you're an expert guest, you often don't get paid. It was hard. I made very little money. And, the whole time in the back of my mind, I was like, I'm going to find a new program. I'm going to go back to school. But this is a fun thing that I'm going to try. And it stuck. And eventually I started getting paid. I started developing television shows. I got booked as a correspondent on different shows. I got booked. I actually worked for a while as a journalist at the Huffington Post and, did a lot of series both on the web and on television. And so far, I've been able to pay my bills doing that, which is, I'm very lucky. I did start, a podcast about halfway through my career in science communication, and that's been really helpful. It's kind of foundational to the work that I do. And I also co-host another podcast, which is like a pretty popular podcast, unlike mine. So
You're still popular.
When you actually look at the numbers, you're like, oh, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Yeah, that's like orders of magnitude more than my podcast. But Talk Nerdy is my baby, and I love it, and I'm never going to stop doing it. And it really matters to me because I love long form interviews. It's just my favorite thing in the world to do. So it's more of an outlet for me than anything. I'm glad some people like it. I'm glad some people choose to support it on Patreon. I'm glad that I am able to sell ads, to make a little bit of money on it. But the truth is I'd probably do it even if nobody listened. I might not do it as frequently, but I'd probably still do it. So yeah, I mean, long story short, that's where I am today. Obviously, I left a lot of things out of that very condensed version of the story, but my path was non-traditional, and the truth is most kind of successful professional science communicators' paths have been non-traditional. The one thing many of us share is that we are freelancers. So that's like a lifestyle that you really have to be ready for. It's not for everybody. I love it, but it is definitely not for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty with freelancing, right? And I feel like that's something that I've certainly been questioning about. Right now I'm still doing the academic track. I still want to try to be a professor somewhere, but I was thinking, well, if I try to do full-time blogging and podcasting and everything, that's, I would have to hope that it catches on and that I have enough supporters to be able to pay my bills. So that's a little different than like a steady paycheck with a regular job. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Like I will have a month or a quarter where I don't make any money, and then I'll have a month or a quarter where I make more than I make in a year. And it's, I mean, especially with TV, because it's so hot and cold. Like I'll get booked on something where I work for 10 weeks and it's just more money than I've seen in a long time. And then I won't work again for 10 more weeks. So, and I have to supplement my income with lots of small jobs. Like I give talks a lot. So, I'll travel all over the country and take multiple layovers to get someplace and give a talk. And it always seems like a good deal until you calculate how much time it takes to get there.
Yeah.
I say that because I'm going to, Madison, Wisconsin, and Moscow, Idaho in a couple of weeks. And apparently it's one layer to get to Madison, one layover to get to Madison from LA, 2 layers to get from Madison to, it's a whole thing. But I am excited about the talk. I get to talk about GMOs, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, I've never given a talk on GMOs. It's weird. I've done a lot of media on it, but I've never given a talk on it. So you're right. I think one piece of advice that a lot of podcasters like to give to other podcasters is like, honestly, it's not don't quit your day job like an insult. It's like, don't quit your day job until you can. Because the great thing about podcasting is you can work around your schedule. And if you're using Patreon and you're, get to the point where you're selling ads, you'll see your income grow. And podcasting is actually pretty regular in the income. You're not going to have all of a sudden 1 week, like 10,000 people aren't going to go, oh, I don't want to listen to this anymore. You know what I mean? It's pretty consistent, and it grows slowly but surely. So it's like, do it for no money and for the love at first. If it grows and if you start to make money, then you can start to sort of say, okay, I can do this other thing less, and now I can do this other thing less. Like podcasting pays my mortgage, which is huge for me. It's always there for me. But it's obviously I couldn't live off of that because it's okay, I pay my mortgage, now how am I going to eat?
Yeah.
I still have to do the other work that, and I love the other work, but it's much less consistent.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And that's something I'm trying to do. But still in the early stages of podcasting. It's been really rewarding so far, and maybe down the road when I get more expertise, it'll grow a little bit. But it's great to listen to other podcasts like your podcast and other podcasts that cover similar issues. I think it's been really helpful. But I think so far we've just been interviewing really awesome guests that have a lot of really cool things to share. So it makes our jobs really easy as hosts.
Oh, Pshaw, that's like the whole secret sauce, right? It's like, I don't do much work here. I just interview really smart people, and they make me look good.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really interesting story. And, you were telling me a little bit before the show about how you are going to go back to school now. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I was trying not to say anything too publicly before I got accepted, right? And then before I sort of agreed to start. But I mentioned it on Skeptic's Guide maybe last week or the week before, and I got a lot of really nice emails about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so there's a school out here it's actually in Santa Barbara. I live in Los Angeles. The school's in Santa Barbara, so it's a bit of a trek, but it's not so far that my electric car can't make it. So that's a good kind of measure. And it's really cool because it's an APA accredited clinical psychology program. And if you know anything about psychology and clinical psychology specifically, it has to be APA accredited if you want to get licensed. It's the only APA accredited program in the country where most of your coursework is distance learning. So basically they record all of the lectures. I get to log in and watch them at my convenience, submit my papers so long as they're by the due date at my convenience. Because a big part of what I do requires travel. And so being able to still do my schoolwork in hotel rooms all over the world is really important to me. And of course, by the time I see patients or clients and I'm in internship mode, like I'll have to dedicate more time to that and less time to my work. But the flexibility is really attractive to me about this program. And also I love that the average age of new PhD students there is 36. So basically I'm not going to school with a bunch of like 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
I don't think I can handle that. No, thank you.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That's really exciting. And to hear an APA accredited program that's distant learning oriented is really exciting, because I think that is the future. I feel like education is very slowly adjusting to the digital age. Like for some reason they still think we have to have people physically there, or else like you're not learning correctly or something. So
I know. And the funny thing is med schools have been ahead of the curve on this for a while. I have a friend who's a physician now. She's a few years into her residency, but when she was in school I was like, how often do you go to campus? And she's like, you don't really. Like you go for gross anatomy and you go for certain classes where you need the interaction. And this school has these week-long sessions that you go to a few times a year, and they have these once a month weekend sessions where you get to be in person with your small groups and bounce ideas off of each other and talk about your struggles and work with a faculty advisor, which is great. But the truth is, why do you need to physically be in the lecture hall if it's just a lecture course?
Right.
It makes no sense. So yeah, I'm practicing interview skills. I should be with people interviewing them, but if I'm listening to lectures, I can do that from anywhere because of the magic of the internet.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are your plans then with your degree? Like, do you want to practice or do research?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
You know what? I think I'll probably want to practice. The truth of the matter is I work in television, and as gross as it is, I have no idea how long I'm going to be able to be gainfully employed in television as a woman in Hollywood. I'm 33 years old right now. By some standards, I'm an old lady. By other standards, I'm still young. Who knows? But I also love the freelance lifestyle. And so I think that clinical psychology will allow for that if I decided to do private practice, for example. But I'm also, and this is a whole random kind of side tangent, I'm also really, really interested in gerontology and death and dying and hospice. I basically took a moment and I looked at my bookshelf and I said, what books do I read when I'm not buying books for work, when I'm not reading the things that publishers send me, when nobody's telling me to do this and I'm just fascinated. And so I bought this sort of as an impulse, and then I read it and was like, cried myself to sleep. And I realized this is all books about death and dying. It's a fascinating topic to me. It's a really emotional topic. There's something about people who are in this final stage of their lifespan where there's a lot of clarity and there's a lot of prioritizing that they do. There's there's a weight to their thoughts and their actions and their behaviors, and there's just less bullshit. You know, it's like they see clearly what matters in their lives, and I find these individuals really inspiring, really fascinating. And I also think that because this part of the lifespan, specifically in Western culture and especially in American culture, is really neglected, ignored. People are afraid of it, so they don't talk about it. They don't plan for it. They don't like to think about it. They don't bring it into their consciousness. This population of people in many ways is neglected. And so if I can make a difference there, you know, oftentimes you have somebody who's in hospice and, you know, they're dying and they know that they're dying and they have a lot of things that they're dealing with that they may not be prepared to deal with, and the person who's helping them through this is their hospice nurse, and these hospice nurses are like angels. They're incredibly skilled and talented, but they do way more than they should be doing, and they do way more than they were trained to do. And it's unfortunate that they have to basically act as therapists in addition to nurses, when honestly that's not really their job, and they're amazing at it, and I you know, I respect them more than anything else in the world, but I'm sure they could use a little help. So my intention, at least as of right now, if during my practica and my internships I realize that it's, you know, doesn't give me too much burnout and it's something I, you know, can handle emotionally, is to work with this population, because I don't know, they fascinate me, and I feel like I could maybe do some good there. And I have so much to learn. I feel like I'm a lifelong learner. I always want to keep learning new things, and who better to learn things from than elderly people, especially. That's not to say everybody in hospice is elderly, but even children that are dying often have this really incredible maturity and intelligence and clarity in their worldview. So, you know, you can learn a lot even from children who are in that phase of their life, but especially elderly people. They're just literally my favorite.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I honestly haven't studied too much of that population, and it makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
We don't get to, right? Even in basic psychology courses, like they really just are ignored in the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, unless you take a specific class on, like, I think there's one developmental class I took that was actually mostly focused on the first 18 years of life and not so much on the elderly at all. So, yeah, I think there's...
it's like it's in there, but you don't...
Yeah,
it's
one chapter somewhere.
Really sexy. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Like looking at how cutthroat a lot of internships are and how competitive they are. Neuropsychology is super sexy right now. That's my entire background. It's probably, if you looked at me on paper, you'd be like, of course, she should do neuropsychology. She's totally prepared for that. I've given, you know, buku neuropsychological assessments. That's my world. That's what I know how to do. But I also do not want to compete with a bunch of 22-year-olds for internships and be stressed. Like, that's just not, I'm an adult now. Like, I don't want to live that lifestyle. You know, I want to enjoy my life. And so, and pediatrics is very sexy. A lot of people want to work with kids. There's something really unsexy about death and dying. It's something that not a lot of people want to do. And so, you know, hell, I'm interested in it fundamentally. And there's probably not a lot of competition. It's kind of just seems like a smart choice for me, being a little bit older in the process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, and like you said, once we have more time to be out in the world and see what our interests are, we can then focus on things that most align with us. So I feel like, you know, I switched areas from neuroscience to sociology, and because I went straight from undergrad to grad school, and if I would have had more time to kind of explore and learn stuff, I might have been jumping into sociology from the first time. So I think having any time to take off and really learn what we're interested, like the books that you mentioned that you pick up for fun, like having time to really learn that, that's really cool. And I'm glad you're able to find this new program that seems to really fit your interests.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear how it goes and your progress on that. And so I guess you're going to be very busy with all the stuff you usually do on top of your program. Do you plan on changing?
I don't want to change the talk nerdy stuff. I hope that doesn't have to change. I may have to delegate a little bit more, so maybe it'll actually improve, because maybe I'll hire somebody to actually do all the audio engineering, which I don't really know how to do anyway. I may have to be more selective in the TV jobs I take and the talks that I do. You know, I may not be able to do as many things that, you know, take a lot of time and don't pay as well, unfortunately. But you know, probably that's better for me anyway. And the truth is, I have no idea if I bit off more than I could chew. I'm not going to know until I'm just in it. There may be a moment where I'm like, I can't do anything else. This is taking up all my time. Or it may be that, you know, over the course of my academic career and also working and freelancing, I really developed a lot of work-life balance skills, and I can, you know, work out a schedule that makes sense for me. I have a feeling I'm more prepared for this now than I ever would have been when I was young.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, once you're in school for a while, you do learn a lot of those tips, and you know, when you develop emotional maturity just growing up, like, yeah, I I certainly feel a better graduate student now than when I was 22. I think it's just so yeah, I think you're gonna do awesome, and excited to see where that goes.
Oh, thanks.
So you mentioned before about how you may find some limitations in television production as a woman, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the experiences you've had in television production compared to some issues regarding women in science.
Well, I mean, obviously, I advocate for women in STEM all the time, and it's a big focus in my work. That said, because my academic background is psychology, like there are more women than men in psychology. So, especially in clinical psychology, neuroscience has pretty good parity as well. But of course, I am incredibly understanding and sympathetic to my friends who are in astrophysics or computer science or engineering, these fields that are like incredibly underrepresented as far as gender parity and honestly ethnic diversity as well. The truth is, I was quite surprised when I left science and I came into television production and realized, like, ooh, this is not a problem just in science. And I think a lot of people who hear us always say, oh, we need more women in science, and what's with the leaky pipeline, and let's talk about gender parity, who work in like corporate, you know, platforms and who are kind of in the business world are like, yeah, that's sort of just the nature of like being in the workforce. Like, it blows, but this is not a unique problem to science. Basically, as you climb up the ladder in almost any field and you get to the top, there are less and less women. There are some, even within psychology, I think, you know, and I don't have any of the statistics off the top of my head, but, you know, you may have an entering class of college freshmen that's like 80% female, and then maybe an entering class of graduate students that are 60% female. But as you climb the ranks, like less and less professors, less and less tenured professors, less and less administrators. And you see the same thing in corporate America. As you get up into the boardroom, there'll be maybe one woman or like one black guy. You know what I mean? And it's like, wait, where are all the other people that look like me and that think like me or maybe don't? So I think one thing that I realized is production is just as bad. There are certain jobs where it's super rare to come across a female jib operator, for example. It's super rare to have a female director on a shoot. You know, certain jobs, like you might see a lot of PAs and APs that are female. You might have female sound ops, but you may not have like grips or gaffers that are female. And so you do start to notice that the gender parity isn't really there sort of across the board. Another difficult thing, being somebody who is, you know, actively working in television shows, is that I am often the sidekick or the what would you call it? Like the correspondent for like a man, usually a white man. It's super hard to get your own science show as a woman. My friend Emily Calandrelli, she hosts a show called Exploration Outer Space. It's a kid's show on Fox Saturday mornings. And by my estimation, and I'm always asking people to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but at least in American broadcast, I think she is the only woman who solely hosts a science show.
Wow.
And it's a kid's show, which means it doesn't pay nearly as much. She has to do a lot of work for like a little bit of income. But on these really big shows, you know, I'm a correspondent on Bill Nye Saves the World on Netflix. I love it. It's such a great show. And I love that Bill made a conscious effort to say, I want a lot of female correspondents. I want to make sure that there's a lot of diversity of voices. And, you know, this is really important to me. But regardless, it's still Bill's show. And of course, Bill's amazing, but like Bill is the standard bearer. You know, we've got Bill, we've got Neil, we've got, we had Sagan. I mean, they're kind of, Bill, Neil, and Sagan are probably the trifecta of sort of the most influential, at least of American, you know, science communicators. And then you've got similar problems in the UK, but I can't speak to that as much because I do think that they actually are more open to quality intellectual programming in the UK. So I've got this uphill battle where it's really common that, you know, when I'm going out for a job, they're like, oh, we want diversity. Oh, we want a female to host it. Oh, and you're edgy and you're different. And this is exactly what we want. And then it iterates and iterates and iterates. And eventually they're like, ooh, we're scared. We're going to hire this white guy with a British accent because he sounds smart. So you do notice that a lot. And on top of that, you have this layer of, oh, that sounds too smart. Our audience won't like it. Oh, can you dumb that down a little bit so that our audience will be more interested? It's really hard to teach network executives, or at least try to show them that, like, you are underestimating your audience here. Please let me show you that we can talk about smart things. You know, when I teach about science communication, which is a big passion of mine, and I actually have a side job that is basically a training workshop, kind of sleepaway camp thing. I always tell people the number one rule is know your audience. Like, that's, you got to know that beforehand. You're not going to use sophisticated language with a third grader, and you're not going to, you know, talk to a theoretical physicist like he's a third grader. So A, know your audience, but B, I always say never underestimate the intelligence of your audience, but always underestimate their vocabulary. And I think a lot of people get those two things mixed up. They're like, oh, but you don't know what that word quantum means. It's like, yeah, it doesn't mean you can't understand the concepts behind it. It's just not your vocabulary. If I were to interview a plumber on my show, I would have to be like, wait. What is that word you just said? Wait. What is that thing? I don't know what any of the, you know, specialized terminology is. That's a big part of science. It's just a bunch of specialized terminology. When you can get past that and actually start to talk about things conceptually, metaphorically, using storytelling, it's not like people aren't going to get it. There's nothing, you know, there's not a barrier between scientists and people where they're like, I don't know, endowed with greater understanding than the rest of the world. No. Because they've been slaving away in a lab for years and years. That's the difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome advice, and I wish, you know, more and more people get involved in science communication. I think slowly that will kind of be more understood among scientists that talk to the public, because I still see that. Even I went to the science cafe in Charleston, and it was really cool. Like, scientists came and talked about their work at a bar, so it was like for a general audience, but they were still using tons of jargon, and it was still like an academic talk. And it's like, yeah, like you said, I mean, that was perfect. Like, that, it's not that they're not intelligent. It's just they don't know what these complicated biology jargon things are, like, because they didn't study it. So obviously they're not going to know what that word means if they never heard it before. So
yeah,
you know, just use different words, you know, analogies and stuff like that. So yeah, that's great. And I was kind of wondering if we could like segue a little bit and expand on that a little bit more, as far as some more of your thoughts for science communication today, and especially in the political climate we see ourselves in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's important. It matters. And the truth is there is actually censorship that's going on at the level of government. You know, I don't know if you guys saw this trending story recently about the researcher who was asked by their DOE grantee to take the words climate change and global warming out of their abstract. And it wasn't like, we don't want to fund you. It was basically like, we want to fund you, so let's not, you know, piss anybody off. Let's be smart about how we talk about this research. So it's a bummer. It's like even the people at the granting agencies are like tiptoeing around. You know, it's obviously it's a really tough time right now. And honestly, the only way to make an impact is to continue to talk about this stuff. And there are different approaches we can take. We know that it's not a problem of like pure knowledge deficit. A lot of it has to do with propaganda. A lot of it has to do with political ideology. But the truth of the matter is, if we stay silent, if individuals who, you know, respect science and respect intellectualism and think that, you know, being smart is not something to be embarrassed by, ashamed of, or I don't know, like if somehow not knowing things is cooler, or like that's not the atmosphere that we want to be fostering in American society. So I think it's important to sort of speak up. It's sort of the angle that I think a lot of atheists take as well, which is like, I'm an atheist, and how do I go about beating the drum? I'm not like, oh my God, I'm an atheist, you're dumb because you're Christian. Like, it's nothing like that. It's more like, I'm an atheist and I'm going to be a nice guy. I'm going to be nice to my neighbors. And then maybe when they're like, oh, you don't believe in God, but you're nice, I don't get it. And you're like, yeah, because I'm a human being. It's the same kind of thing with science communication. It's like, yeah, I care about science and I'm totally normal and I'm not like any smarter than you. You could care about science too. Trust me. Just read a magazine. It's important to me. It's important to me to continue to sort of, and the truth is, I think young people get it. Like, young people want to be perceived as smart and as dialed in and as knowledgeable, and old people get it. And there's sort of these people in the middle that worry me right now, and they worry me a lot. It's tough, but also so much of the anti-science climate has nothing to do with ignorance in the traditional sense of the term. Like, when we think about ignorance, we think of like a lack of knowledge, but it's ignorance in a much more pernicious sense of the term, like misinformation and pseudoscience and agenda-driven, politically motivated anti-science rhetoric that really has absolutely nothing to do with trying to get people not to believe in science, and has everything to do with trying to get people not to trust authority and trying to get people not to want to invest their money in places that would kind of protect and sort of shepherd our planet for the future. So it's a bummer, because the truth is, like, climate deniers aren't climate deniers because they're religious. Plenty of religious people are not climate deniers. There's nothing inherently like anti-Christian about believing in global warming. Climate deniers are climate deniers because they've been fed a lie, and they've been fed that lie by like a massive PR machine that's really good at continuing that lie. That's really what it is. And when you start to realize who is behind these lies, which politicians and which corporate entities are really just protecting their bottom line, and they're like, no, you can't believe in climate change because that means I won't make as much money pulling fossil fuels out of the ground and protecting these industries, that's where things, start to fall apart. It's like when you really follow the chain and you try to get to the core of the reasoning, you realize, wait, this isn't about religion. This isn't about morals. This is about money. And that's how a lot of the anti-science rhetoric that's out there is fueled. It's the same thing with anti-GMOs. It's the same thing with anti-vaxxers. There are massive, massive pseudoscientific industries around trying to make people afraid of systems that are in place, and systems that are in place to help protect us and that function relatively well. They have their problems, but what we do is we pick at those threads and we go, see this problem? You shouldn't trust them at all. Let's throw the baby out with the bathwater and instead take these herbs. Yeah. And you're like, oh God, this is so dangerous.
Yeah, no, that's sadly true, and it's so frustrating, and I take the approach for my research of like the social ramifications, all that. Like, you're totally right that the money drives a lot of this, and then we can see, like, once people develop these social networks of, for example, other conservatives that share similar views against climate change, then it's very threatening for people to accept the evidence that climate change is true, because their identity is formed by having that value that's very important. All of their friends and family likely have the same views, so to go against that is just a very worldview threatening thing. And
that's not easy for people at all. Like, I used to be a smoker, right? Or even more severe. Like, when I was in late high school, early college, I did a lot of drugs. I like smoked a lot of weed, and I, dropped acid, and I did ecstasy and went to parties, and that was like my culture. And so I had these groups of friends that were sort of like my drug friends, and you don't realize it at the time, but like what you guys do together is you do drugs. And not everybody does drugs. It feels like everybody does drugs when you like to do drugs with your friends. But then I had other friends who were like, I don't do that. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And then later, when I decided, okay, this is like, I don't want to do it as much. It's making me not as good at school, or like it's beating my body up too much, and I'm ready to just take a little break. And eventually I quit altogether. I realized, like, those friends aren't very fun. Like, we kind of have nothing in common. And they're always like fucked up. And so like being around them is sort of not fun for me. And And it's hard because you have to come to that on your own, because the truth of the matter is those people aren't going to help you come to that. You might meet somebody sort of in a different group who maybe thinks a little bit differently and be like, oh, that's interesting, maybe I want to consider that more. But it requires almost like a mini divorce, or like a, a breakup from your friends or from your social circle. And hopefully you come to that gradually and it doesn't feel so jarring. But for some
Mm-hmm.
people who basically like realize they're an atheist, or realize they're gay, or realize that they're, a closet liberal when they thought they were conservative, or vice versa, a closet
Mm-hmm.
conservative when they thought they were liberal, it can be a rude awakening. And it can be really hard to be like, oh, by the way, I think completely differently than every single person I ever hang out with.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk about any of this stuff anymore because it makes me uncomfortable and we're going to get in fights.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's spot on, and it's so powerful. Like, and it kind of relates to what we were
Mm-hmm.
saying before. It's not that these people are not intelligent enough to understand the evidence. It's just there's just overwhelming pressure to reject the science in a lot of cases. Like, if all your friends, for example, like with GMOs, even if you have a lot of friends that are all anti-GMO and want to buy organic, and that's like really what they're into, and then all of a sudden they
Mm-hmm.
listen to you like give a talk on it, they're like, uh-oh, like this makes a lot of sense, but a lot of my friends disagree with this, and like I've been doing this for like 10 years now, and it's just it's so challenging. Even if they can intellectually understand it, the emotions can be just so strong.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's it's a very complicated problem, and there's just so many different you know so many different angles that we can try to approach it.
And it is a multifaceted approach. I mean, I think that the great thing about science communication is that one person can't do it all. Like even Neil deGrasse Tyson can't do it all. There are plenty of people out there where we are like, "Oh, NDGT," and they're like, "I have no idea who you're talking about." And you're like, "Really? How do you live under a rock?" And they're just like, "I don't know that person." Or they're like, "Oh, that person doesn't really speak to me," or "What does he know about my life?" And or "I don't really like the approach that so and so uses because they're too cynical," or "I don't like the approach that so and so uses because they try to be too funny," or
Mm-hmm.
it's just that's why it's such a great field, and it's such an important time to be a scientist or a journalist, to be somebody who's approaching SciComm and who wants to be involved in science communication, because we need a chorus of voices that all have their own flavor and their own variation. Some people don't like listening to me because they think I have vocal fry and I sound like a valley girl. I mean, there's like all sorts of sexist and non-sexist complaints about like my voice is annoying and all the things. And fine, okay, that's great. If I annoy you and I'm grating, maybe you shouldn't listen to me, but hopefully you do find individuals out there who speak to you and who speak kind of truth to power, and who speak reason and evidence, that you're getting something out of. We can't all please everybody, which is why this is not a cutthroat field necessarily. It's a really
Mm-hmm.
collaborative field. And I mean, honestly, that's why I love it the most, because Hollywood sucks. Hollywood is so cutthroat. But I'm lucky enough to have a huge group of science communicator friends who all support each other in their different endeavors.
Yeah, yeah, that's I totally agree with all that, and it's so necessary to take all these different approaches because, like you're saying, it's going to impact everyone differently. People are going to prefer different approaches, and the more voices we have out there, kind of like we were saying earlier, the better it is for everyone, because then we might find a certain audience might really resonate with a certain speaker, and if we get
Yeah.
more of those speakers out there instead of just like a couple people, a couple guys that kind of like run the show, then it's going to be helpful if we have lots of different voices. So I think we are starting to see that, but still so long to go.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's so easy to get bogged down on the negatives. So I try to just any like small win that comes across, I'm always just trying to focus like, well, at least we got this, and just trying to turn forward. Especially given what's been happening the last few months in the states.
Ugh, seriously.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, we'll try not to go into
I'm like,
that
I'm
that
depressed.
person.
No, it's true. I
um,
mean, it's why I co-hosted the March for Science on Earth Day of this year down in DC, and it was so meaningful to see how many people showed up. like what a massive turnout it was, both in DC, where it was pouring down rain and people still came out in March, but also like across the country. And I had lots of friends who sort of hosted these ancillary events, and it was just really powerful seeing all of those voices saying like, we care about evidence and we don't want to be silenced, and we don't want to live in a society, especially a democratic society, where our voices are made to be quiet, when basically we're just telling you how the world works. We're just investigating nature. Nature does not give a shit about us. It's just going to be, and we are interrogating that and trying to make references about it. That's all we're doing. So if science doesn't fit your political agenda, the science isn't going to change. You need to change because that's just how the world is. And I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people, if they dug a little bit deeper, would very quickly realize that like there's some bullshit in the air, especially with climate change. Or even GMOs, vaccines, all of it. Like the more you read about it and the more you really start to look at the science, and this famously happened to Bill Nye, who I don't want to say was anti-GMO, but he had questions and he had reservations, and those questions and reservations were legitimate. But then he was like, you know what, I'm going to talk to some smart people about this, and I'm going to read some articles, and I'm going to figure out where the consensus is. If people read like ExxonMobil's climate reviews, and reports, like who knows better about climate change than fossil fuel industries? They've known about it for decades.
Yeah.
It's in their reports because they have to make a plan to mitigate for it. You know what I mean? And that's really the truth. It's like read between the lines. Even this new Rick Perry energy report that came out, he wanted to do a big report about the grid and about what the grid could withstand. And the idea there was like, oh, we can't invest all this money in renewables because that'll shut down the grid. And we really need to have this base of fossil fuels. But the report came back and said the grid's fine. The grid's doing great with renewables. It can stand even more renewables. And there are a lot of positive outcomes from us investing in these renewables. So what did they do? They couldn't change the science. So they just rewrote the results section. And the truth is, if you actually read the study, the results section is in direct contradiction to the findings. And it's like, if we just peer a little bit below the surface, but it's hard and it takes a lot of effort. And that's why I think people rely on people like you and like me and like Bill Nye and like Neil deGrasse Tyson, because it's hard. It takes specialized training and it takes like work. And like, God, you work all day on your own job. You want to do somebody else's job too? That's not fun.
It is a lot of extra work. And I just saw an article recently, a sociology article about like the social circles that scientists have on Facebook, and not even necessarily science communicators like that do that as their hobby. But the gist of the article was that if you know a scientist and you're friends with them on Facebook, you trust them and you trust their knowledge and their opinions on things. So if they would just spend a little bit of time on their private Facebook page sharing thoughts about stuff related to their field, then that can spread to all their Facebook friends and then the friends of those friends. And then if we just had more scientists just sharing their opinion, because we spend in the lab all day, like we know this stuff, that's like what we do, and it would be so powerful. And I think we're slowly getting to that more accepted in academia, because academia is still kind of weird as far as like, oh, you should just be researching all the time. Why are you, wasting time with outreach? But, now it's actually directly impacting science, because if we don't have people spreading the importance of science, then we're not going to get science funding at all. So it's important that way too.
It's true because, it used to be that there was sort of this understanding, science was sort of sacrosanct and the government was going to fund important science. And if you could prove, to the government that what you were doing sort of seemed reasonable and that you weren't wasting the government's money, then sure, like here's your funding. But more and more often the bar is climbing up and people are like, wait, I don't understand it. Why are you doing this? How is this going to help me personally? Why does this matter to a growing population? How is this going to mitigate or actually prevent some of the dangers of, all of these future calamities? These questions are becoming more and more important, and scientists are more often finding that they have to defend their work. And it's not just good is good enough anymore. It's not just, oh, well, what I do is important. Like, I know you don't understand it, but deal with it. It's important. Now, the granting bodies are like, no, help me understand it. Like, this is necessary. And so, gosh, when a scientist can explain what they do in a bar to, somebody who works as a publicist, or somebody who works as a teacher, or somebody who works as an electrician, and they can really communicate that in a way that's like, oh, that's what you do? Oh, that's really cool. Or like,
Yeah.
okay, that sounds really boring and tedious, but it's important and I'm glad you do it. That matters.
Yeah.
Matters.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's all great. And I was just kind of wondering, to go on that, just if you could talk about some of the projects you're currently invested with science communication. I know you have the science communication camp, which sounds really cool. So if you could talk a little bit about that and the goals of that project.
Yeah, how are we going to get you there? You need to come.
Yeah, I'd love to come.
It's so much fun. Okay, so we do SciComm Camp every year. This is our third year. The first 2 years we did it at this camp that was in Malibu, which, yes, it was awesome, and yes, it sounds awesome. But do not fear, this new camp is even better. We basically outgrew the campground in Malibu, and now we are in the Simi Hills, which is more like northern Los Angeles, and it's beautiful because it's like in the wilderness. Beautiful dark sky. We do an astronomy night that's really fun. And when I say camp, everybody's like, ooh, summer camp. And yes, it is like summer camp, but it's for grown-ups, and it's for people who want to improve their science communication skills. So we have all levels. We have people who are like, I'm thinking about starting a blog, but I don't know where to start, all the way to people who are like professional YouTubers who have been doing this for years and years and years, and basically want to learn a new skill, like how do I improve my photography, or I want to get better at writing, or hey, I just want to meet a bunch of other science communicators because it matters to me that I have a community. Because a lot of SciCommers, as you know, like we're really siloed. Most of us are freelancers, and even if we're not, even if we're on staff, we're like one of a handful of science communicators at that institution, and everybody else is like either doing science or PR or something. So it's basically a long weekend. It's a Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday morning. And this year it's October 13th to 15th, I think. And there are still some spots open, but we are filling up pretty quickly. And this year we changed our fee structure to try and allow more people to be able to come. So basically the way that it works is all the rooms are the exact same. And think of it, it's summer camp in the sense that it's like, outdoorsy, but they're like hotel rooms. It's really nice. But they're still, you can roast marshmallows and stuff. But they're basically like motel rooms with attached bathrooms. So this year, basically the least expensive ticket is you have one of 4 beds in that room. The most expensive ticket is if you want the whole room to yourself. You can do that where there's just one bed in the room, but then you're basically paying a premium for that. And then there's levels in between. If you're like, oh, I couldn't handle 3 roommates, that's not my style, that's fine. Those go out to grad students usually, or undergrads, people who are like, I don't care if it's cheap. I don't mind having 3 roommates. And then you've got every level in between. You've got families who will buy tickets and things like that. So we're playing with that fee structure this year, and I think it allows for a lot of flexibility so that people of all stripes and of all career stages can be comfortable at camp. And we've got, our keynote is Emily Calandrelli, the woman I told you about, who has her own television show on Fox Mornings. We've got 2 pre-camp workshops this year. Margot Lightman is teaching storytelling. She actually teaches storytelling at UCB, the Upright Citizens Brigade here in LA, and she's amazing at it. And Vanessa Hill, who you might know from her YouTube channel Braincraft, is teaching like a YouTube fundamentals workshop. Those are the ones that you can pay for and submit for. But the cool thing is your ticket includes your choice of other workshops that are included. We have 4 workshops that are included, and all of these cool kind of breakout sessions, the keynote. There's another speaker that's going to be there. We have an astronomy night, a stargazing night. We have a really fun kind of science carnival party with a bar one of the nights, and it includes your lodging and all your food. So it's like one-stop shop. You show up to camp and you're just like in it. You're in it to win it for the whole weekend. You make so many friends, and you learn a lot. And honestly, like for me, the most important part is all of the relationships that I make there. It's a lot of fun. And we're talking like world-class science communicators go. So like I said before, everywhere from somebody who's like, I've thought about doing it and I'd like to listen to your podcast and it makes me want to start my own podcast, to like, Derek Muller, Veritasium came last year, and just
Wow.
like these huge YouTubers and these like massive and like TV personalities and stuff like Phil Torres has come before, Aaron Pomerantz has come before. These people who are like, you know, really doing it. I'm there every year, and I do a lot of
Mhm.
television. So all walks of science communication and all outlets: photography, writing, blogging, video production, groups, sort of like one-on-one and then large group science communication, because a lot of people are want to be involved in festivals and science in the
Mhm.
pub and that kind of stuff. So we really dive deep into all of those aspects. That was a long spiel, sorry, but
Yeah,
I'm
no,
really
thank
excited
you.
about it this year, and I want new people to come. So when is this going to
Yeah.
air, this episode?
I'll try to get it up tomorrow.
Oh,
We'll
shut up. Oh,
see.
that's great. No, no. Yeah, because it's not until October. But like I said, we are like starting to run out of rooms, but there are still some
Hmm.
options available. So I really am excited to see if some new folks will sign up and come join us this year.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll try to get it up. Grad school permitting, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yeah. But I think I definitely shared your link, and yeah, I would love to go. I think I have. I have an evening class on Thursday night, so if I were to like take a plane, because it's what, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right?
Yeah, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but it doesn't start until like late afternoon Friday.
Okay, cool.
And remember, we're on the West Coast, which means it's earlier here.
That's a good point. I
Yep.
am
Yep. You
very
travel
far
through
away.
time. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
wow,
that's
that's exciting.
Yeah, that's always frustrating for me when I book jobs on the East Coast, because I'll
Hmm.
leave like ass early in the morning my time and I still get there at night. I'm like, ah. But then when
Yeah,
I come
yeah.
home, I have a whole day in front of me, which is nice.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a great program. I did one science communication workshop in Chicago last
Hmm.
year, and it was super rewarding to, like you said, the most important thing is meeting other people. I think, like the workshops are great, and you can learn a lot from the experts, but then just talking to people and building those relationships and really hearing the in-depth stories about what they do and what they're trying to do, I think it's really helped me, and it's really shifted a lot of my work to be more science communication oriented, because I was doing a lot of activism, and in addition to grad school, now I'm more shifting towards science communication, which makes more sense since I'm being trained as a scientist. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, awesome. That's really cool. Is there any other upcoming projects or any upcoming TV shows that you want people to know about?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the biggest thing right now is to, just keep tuning in to Talk Nerdy. If you haven't already, I would love to have you. And I love to hear people's feedback all the time. I'm continuing to work on the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. I'm going to be at Dragon Con this coming weekend, if you are going to be there in Atlanta.
Oh,
And
cool.
I'm not sure yet when my episodes will air, but the new season of Bill Nye Saves the World will be out, I think, later this year and a little bit into early next year. And I'm a correspondent on 2 episodes of the new season. So just, keep your eyes open for season 2 of that to drop, and you'll see some work that I did there.
Awesome. That all sounds great. Thank you again for so much for coming on. I'm excited to share this and do all the post production stuff, and it'll hopefully be up soon.
You
uh,
lie. That part's never exciting. You're excited to
all
be
right.
done with the post production. Yeah.
All right. Maybe that's more accurate. All right. Awesome. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Kara, for coming on, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.